it was asked of me how this meeting came about, and I was in Israel last week. I had the opportunity to talk, along with my colleagues in our Codel, with Shimon Peres, the foreign minister, as well as Mr. Netanyahu. And I would like maybe the former prime minister to comment on this, but it was my impression, and I think the impression of my colleagues, both Democrat, Republicans, and independents who were on the trip with us, that while the Likud and Labor do have differences of opinion, they seem to be of one mind regarding the threat that emanates from Iraq regarding Saddam Hussein. And so if you would illuminate on that, Mr. Netanyahu, I'd appreciate it. And with that, you're welcome to address the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Burton. It's a pleasure being with all of you, and I appreciate the thoughtful remarks and thoughtful questions from all of you distinguished representatives. I will try to address your questions in the course of my opening remarks and in the question and answer session that will follow it, because I think they're valid and important, all of them. And they need, I think the world needs, this discussion and other discussions that will be taking place in this capital of liberty. Last year, a few days after September 11th, I was given the privilege of appearing before this committee to discuss the issue of terrorism. But I have to tell you that had I been given the opportunity to speak before September 11th, I believe I would have offered pretty much the same suggestions about how the war on terrorism should be fought and how it can be won. I would have pointed out that the key to defeating terrorism lies in deterring and destroying the regimes that harbor, abet, and aid terror. I would have argued that to root out terror, the entire network of terror, that is a network that consists of some half a dozen terrorist regimes and some 24 terror organizations affiliated with them, that this entire terror network had to be brought down. And most important, I would have warned that the greatest danger facing our world is the ominous possibility that any part of this terror network would acquire nuclear weapons. Now, I have to be candid and say that even had I presented my views in the most coherent and persuasive fashion, I have no doubt that some of you, and perhaps most of you, would have regarded them as exaggerated and even alarmist. But then came September 11th, and fiction turned into fact, and the unimaginable became real. That single day of horror alerted most Americans to the grave dangers that are now facing our world. And many Americans understand today that had Al-Qaeda possessed nuclear weapons last September, then the city of New York would not exist today. And they realized that we could all have spent yesterday grieving not for thousands of dead, but for millions. But for others around the world, I suppose the power of imagination is not so acute. It appears that some people will have to once again see the unimaginable in front of their eyes before they are willing to do what must be done. Because how else can one explain the violent opposition, the insistent opposition to President Bush's plan to dismantle Saddam Hussein's regime? Now, I don't mean to suggest for a moment that the questions raised here and other questions are not relevant. That is, that there aren't legitimate questions about a potential operation against Iraq. Indeed, there are. But the question of whether removing Saddam's regime is itself legitimate is not one of them. And equally immaterial in my mind is the argument that America cannot oust Saddam without prior approval of the international community. Because this is a ruler who is rapidly expanding his arsenal of biological and chemical weapons. This is a dictator who has used these weapons of mass destruction against his subjects and his neighbors. And this is a tyrant who is feverishly trying to acquire nuclear weapons. The dangers posed by a nuclear-armed Saddam were understood by my country 2 decades ago, well before September 11th. In 1981, the late Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, dispatched the Israeli Air Force on a pre-dawn raid that destroyed the Iraqi nuclear reactor at Osirak. This probably took place months away from Saddam's ability to assemble the critical mass of plutonium for the first atomic bomb, or more than one. Now, at the time, Israel was condemned by all the world's government, even the government of our closest friend, the United States. But I think that over time, history has rendered a far kinder judgment on that act of unquestionable foresight and unmistakable courage. And I believe that it is history's judgment that should inform our own judgment today. Did Israel launch that preemptive strike because Saddam had committed a specific act of terror against us? Did we coordinate our actions with the international community? Did we condition this operation on the approval of the United Nations? No, of course not. Israel acted because it understood, we understood, that a nuclear-armed Saddam would place our very survival at risk. And today the United States must destroy the same regime because a nuclear-armed Saddam will place the security of our entire world at risk. And make no mistake about it, if and once Saddam has nuclear weapons, the terror network will have nuclear weapons. And once the terror network has nuclear weapons, it is only a matter of time before those weapons will be used. You cannot prevent a dictator who has used terrorism in the past, who cavorts and supports and encourages terror organizations from using this weapon by giving it to someone, by having them threaten to use it against his enemies. Once one of the terror regimes, once one of the principal regimes in the terror network has nuclear weapons, you cannot prevent the terror network from having nuclear weapons. 2 decades ago, it was possible to thwart Saddam's nuclear ambitions by bombing a single installation. But today, nothing less than dismantling his regime will do, because Saddam's nuclear program has fundamentally changed in those 2 decades. He no longer needs one large reactor to produce the deadly material necessary for atomic bombs. He can produce it in centrifuges the size of washing machines that can be hidden throughout the country. And I want to remind you that Iraq is a very big country. It is not the size of Monte Carlo. It is a big country. And I believe that even free and unfettered inspections will not uncover these portable manufacturing sites of mass death. So no